Tech and kids. Is there a middle ground? Is there a way for us to do it at all and better? We explore that with a psychologist in today's show. Jocelyn, how are you?
I am pretty well. I'm a little bit chilly. That's why I'm a bit rugged up today.
I know, as we record this, it is rainy, it is cold, and we're talking about something that can feel a bit dark and cold for a lot of parents out there, which is tech and our kids. I want to ask you to just recap then, I guess, give us a bit of a quick 101 on, as we live in this world where we're bombarded with the everything digital is toxic messages. Um, how do we create that healthy dialogue with our kids? What are some of the simplest, most fundamental things that we should be ticking on off our sort of lists, I guess?
Sure. Look, I run with the food analogy, not the drug analogy when it comes to humans and technology, because I think it's one we hopefully by now have a handle on, that we can think about how are we, snacking, sometimes binging and feasting on technology, and what are the virtual vitamins and what are the things that we actually are looking for within technology, and what are the ultra processed foods. And the ultra processed foods right now is really the deep fake and the misinformation and disinformation, and being able to identify that, know that it's probably going to show up, but it's kind of like a sushi train, let that slip on by and not engaging with it. So, I mean, look, ultimately my work is specifically around the habits to do with how we use screens. So when I talk about digital nutrition, it's really a philosophy where we think about what's our relationship there so that we can live well and be connected without needing to go on digital detoxes where we swear ourselves off, but don't do any of the cognitive change that's required to actually look at why is it so easy to pick up our phone and have a cheeky check when we're standing on the supermarket queue or wherever we are, because it fills those gaps so easily, and we really need to pull ourselves back. And where my work has really changed is from it being about kids to us as the adults with hopefully a fully developed prefrontal cortex starting to role model and pull ourselves back out, like really check in on our own habits, because I think post-pandemic, we really haven't found those boundaries with technology got so porous, and we really don't have that clear off switch. For some people, they don't need it. They're integrators rather than segmenters, so they don't segment their work, but really looking at what do we need, what are our unique diets, and then what's our family kind of nutrition plan. So possibly it in a nutshell, what we consume, and then our relationship with those devices, and finding, diverse ways of consuming online. So that's not about, even the types of games we play. I think we get into the digital hot chips of Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite, and knowing that there's a lot of other games that we can play, and playing them together as a family might be a simple tweak that we did there.
Yeah. My son just saved up for a PS5. And that was a months-long project. It was a really great exercise in delayed gratification. And there's one controller. So I can't even race the little Grand Prix game that he's got with him, which I'd actually quite fancy doing. I remember loving those sorts of games when I was a kid. But yes, I really feel that I don't like the aloneness of the single controller even, because there's not even the option to bring a friend into that. Or so I've put that on I wonder if he listens to my podcast, but that's in his birthday list, because I think technology has got to at least be social if we're going to spend a lot of time on it in the sense of hanging out, and quite useful, I'm finding, for teenage boys who want to talk so much less. It can actually be a really nice way to still bond, but like on a common thing and not have to talk so much.
Absolutely. So the research shows that gaming, when you're gaming side by side in the same room, has a lot more kind of pro-social benefits and general benefits Then when you're gaming alone in your, say, bedroom, and hopefully when he gets the PS5, you've got a whole tech use agreement around where and when he can use that and all those sorts of things.
Oh, it's in the living room.
Good.
It's not in the bedroom. No,
Excellent. You know,
no.
a lot of these things end up in the bedroom because they make lots of noise and you're really loud and talking to your friends, and we want everything to be simple and clean and neat. But when you're playing, alone against people that you may or in fact may not know, that's where things get a little bit tricky as well, trying to check that the person that they say they are actually is who they are. Playing side by side is the best way to play, according to some of the research.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah,
Instinct was right on that one.
Yes.
I'm already feeling like I've got to run on the board.
Go and get that second, third, fourth, however many controllers you need to make that an embodied thing as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so interesting. And one of the things that I've just picked up on there is the gaming when you are alone and connecting into conversations with other people. And that can obviously be a bit of a scary landscape for, say, Gen X parents and Gen Y who just like that. That was not even an option, even if you did like video games growing up. I loved Nintendo. And was the proud completer of Ninja Turtles and what else was there? Super Mario, of course. Loved them. And being neurospicy, I kind of get why that was so fun, that completion and achievement aspect of those sorts of simple games. But in this landscape, as you say, we could be talking to complete strangers online who could have fake profiles, pretend they're a kid who goes to school like a couple of suburbs away, and be sexual groomers. Like that is a reality in today's gaming landscape. How can we navigate that with our kids productively without, because I feel like in teen living, it can be quite easy to arc up against an inquiry from a parent that's well-meaning.
Yeah. It's a really tricky one because part of what teens are doing is trying to be independent and know everything, right? They've got this little miner's torch on their head and they think, I can see ahead of me. Whereas we have the floodlights and we can look out for that ripple effect and spot the blind spots that they just don't have yet. So sometimes it feels like, oh, I wouldn't be like, I wouldn't let that happen to me. Or, I know these people, or why would anyone want to do that? They just actually cannot conceptualize that anyone would want to have nefarious means, right? And so part of that is how we have conversations about risks and opportunities and how we set the tone around safety, both psychologically as well physically. And, everybody's raving and talking a lot about Jonathan Haidt's new book, which some of which I struggle with, other parts of it are absolutely true around we have made playgrounds so super safe that they're boring, quite frankly. But digital playgrounds are a wild west that as parents, we are not interested a lot of the time, interested in knowing about, interested in understanding. So
bandwidth, I will add.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Understand.
Like it's just like, oh, please, I just don't have the space in my brain to work out all of the things that you have learned from these games with zero input from adults, which is part of why I think we find it quite challenging is like, wow, you don't even need me. So because you didn't need me to learn the game, you don't need me to kind of do some of those higher order thinking skills like look out for your safety and vulnerabilities in those spaces. So it's this really interesting dance and also a misunderstanding of, yes, they can use technology really easily, but they don't have those social emotional skills that only time and unfortunately practice sometimes can give you. So it's the practice of having your heart broken that helps you be better in relationships. It's the practice of having a friendship miscommunication that helps you be better at friendships. Now, we don't want kids to learn by having awful experiences like that in online spaces. So it's a very, very complex one that, again, like, when we talk about this, sometimes people are like, oh, you didn't give me one single strategy. I'm like, no, because every family is different in terms of how we would approach a particular problem or issue as it came up. For kids who, you know, might have autism spectrum disorder, they might be really using those online spaces as one of their only sources of connection. Sometimes parents' initial reaction is to then ban it or take it away. And if that's your source of connection and it's removed, that can actually be really, really detrimental if it's not replaced with appropriate kinds of connection and belonging. So we have to, you know, be really careful then how we approach addressing some of the exposure to risks and how we address some of the ways that we get that, you know, balance, inverted commas balance. Sometimes I like to use the word blend because I don't think you can be perfectly balanced. To try and then come up with what is a way to mitigate the risks. And I talk about an app that sometimes it's, you know, has some glitches, but it's called Trust, and trusting young people and learning to build that trust. And Brené Brown talks beautifully about the way that trust is like a bank account. We're constantly making deposits around it to build that. And, you know, it starts so early. If you've got a kid who's disconnected, you can get that connection back, to really hope that they come to you and know that they're not going to get in trouble if something's bad's gone on online, right?
Yeah, 100%.
That's why kids don't come to us, because they're like, I know you're going to take the phone away, and the phone is like more important to me than the family pet. And, you know, we've been in situations where we've seen kids and we're like, sweetie, why didn't you come and talk to us about that? And she was like, oh, because I swore in the messages and I didn't want to get in trouble for swearing. And we're like, that's the least of our concerns right now.
Wow.
Their little brains are focused on this thing they did wrong, not this imminent threat of you were just about to go and meet up with somebody who actually wasn't who they said they were. So that's just a really simple example of how they're framing can miss some of the problems, and just can't imagine, as I say, that those floodlights, we can see the potential problems. They can't see the problem until it's right on their doorstep, because they don't have that wiring to think about it.
Yeah, 100%. And can I run through something that I've instigated when I found something out in my own mother-son relationship? And this was actually a real world situation, not a digital one. Where my son's massively into coins, or ADHD kid, so not anymore, but he was. And so was a person who in our community sells a magazine on the street outside Woolworths. And that's their way of earning their living. And it's, you know, amazing. But he's also into coins. They develop a friendship. Then he says he can get a certain coin for Seb. What's the phone number? I completely shut off that whole, and we blocked the number, and had the chat. And what I said was, did you get introduced to this person by someone we know and trust? Do you know where they live? Do you know what their friends are like? Do you know what school they went to, where they grew up? Or do you have any context to tell you this person is trustworthy other than your shared joy over this particular topic? And he was like, no. And I said, so context and points of context for me build a trust account with someone.
Yes.
Right? So I was introduced by a friend, or my parents introduced me to him. And then boom, 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 boom. And if you don't have any context points that you can add up to say trust is appropriate, then that is not someone we exchange a phone number with.
That's right. Exactly.
Was that I'm just putting my situation out there so that we've got some real world stuff. And I feel like in the digital space, it could be a similar framework almost. Like if you're just chatting to someone online, no matter what they're saying, the only thing you have in common is this game that you both like to play. That's it. Yeah. So there's no context to build trust outside of that.
That's right. But again, it's the context of what you're doing. So if all you're doing is playing a game, and you show up and you play this game and you're like, hey, thanks, that was a great game, see you later. It doesn't matter if
it's fine.
Have that introduction. It's the escalation and the deepening of that connection.
Yes.
And most of us want that deepening of connection. Most of us don't need more acquaintances. We want the people that we can go deep quickly with, right? We want that, whatever that might look like. So in the context of this person, maybe there too is a way that both of them could have their needs met with you as that kind of scaffold or the mediator, really, to say, hey, we're not going to give you his number, but we could talk about this special coin maybe for his birthday. And then you can model to him how to set some of those boundaries. Because what I'm hearing you say is basically, we like this person's, has a different life to us. They have a role in our community. We want to actually feel that kind of connection and trust, but we also want to have really clear boundaries. And that kind of feels icky as intuitively to you as a mom, where you don't want to blow up that connection, but you also don't want to go to that next level.
100%. So it's not about, oh, we don't talk to that person anymore. We don't buy the magazine. We still religiously buy the magazine.
Yeah.
But it's, for me, it was the escalation of connection that was like a big red flag because we didn't have enough context.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so similarly, playing, in a game or whatever, that might be fine. But when somebody starts to ask you more about your life, where they're building a picture of you and you're probably telling the truth because you're a kid and you don't think that that means anything, and that person can be feeding you fibs, that's where it does get a bit tricky. So, I mean, look, the message here too is that within most games, you can play modifications where you can only play with people that are invited in. There are lots of security features and functions at so many levels, whether it's in the, in the game, within the modification, within, I mean, when we're talking about parental controls, it can be on your Wi-Fi, on your USB. There's so many ways that we can actually put some kind of shark nets into place.
Can you talk specifically about what some of those are?
Look, it's a bit techie and it's a bit dry, to be honest, because there's so many ways that it can roll, because you could be on a range of different internet service providers. You could be on PS5, you could be on, so many different consoles, playing so many different games. It's you kind of this is where Google is really, really helpful because you can go and literally look up, how do I do these certain things?
Yeah, okay.
The other reason,
a good old-fashioned internet search on setting up some parental parameters on whatever it is you're concerned about is free and able to be found.
Yes. And so what I say today might then get updated tomorrow, because many of the platforms, including something like TikTok, actually has really great parental controls. No one talks about that, but they do if you know how to use them. The eSafety Office has a page all about parental controls, and that's probably the most up-to-date place. But again, if you go directly to, I want to know on this version of Minecraft what to do, or on this, PlayStation, whatever number we're up to now, etc. So yeah, it is, you've got to tame your technology and get it working for you. And that's simple things like turn off those notifications, right? Really know how to use focus time. If you're on iPhone, or there's different, again, millions of different phones, but they all have generally a very similar set of tools that really help you control your time and what gets through to you at different points.
Great to know. So when it comes to escalation, what are some of your tips for having a chat? I mean, I know I shared that particular situation, but like building literacy into our kids when, as you said before, they can't even conceive of some of the evil that could be done or could be intended in some of these interactions. And so that in itself creates a big blind spot. So how do we not terrify them of something that's very unlikely to happen? Like, we have to be real here.
Yeah.
It is still a minority in terms of it actually happening. While also making them go, oh, I'm going to talk to my parents about that. That doesn't look right.
So this is a little bit about tuning into what you notice and getting better at noticing some of the signals that when we're in these really kind of highly sensory, like fast-paced, dynamic worlds. If you're playing a game, you don't have a whole different kind of hard drive just for monitoring for predators and fact-checking people. And again, our floodlight system goes to trying to pick that all up. and as women sometimes comes out in what I call the naggy voice.
Mm.
And I get young people, I always kind of try and help young people to reframe that when they're hearing their mother nag or their father nag, whoever is parenting them, what that actually is them saying, I love you and I want you to have the best life and be safe.
Mm.
So, and also if you just did the thing the first time, then they wouldn't have to say it 7 times. That's also a thing I communicate.
Oh,
Like,
I feel like we're getting a kid masterclass by just adding that little
right?
cheeky in.
You could
Yeah.
just do that, right? So don't get me wrong. I don't come at all from like, oh, parents shouldn't nag. We absolutely need to communicate our concerns, but we need to communicate it in a way that they're not going to roll their eyes and go, oh, that's not going to happen, or you don't know anything, because quite frankly, we don't sometimes know. We don't play in those spaces. So part of it can be just to have like the check-ins when it's not hitting the fan or there's not some awful headline, and we're not kind of blowing it up to make it like, hey, I just want to check in that this bad thing isn't happening to you. And they're like, no, leave me alone. And because there's that sense of like not trusting them, there's again that sometimes stubborn teenage sense of not wanting a parent to be right. And we want to be really careful. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about your safety, your well-being, you having the best of both worlds, and us doing our jobs.
Yeah.
Right? And our job is to have as much of a sense of the safety in those online worlds as we do when they're at a gymnastics class or at the park or rock climbing or BMXing or whatever that physical thing is. And I think there's that big disconnect where we don't really know, like if your kid goes BMX riding, or there was some new kind of, I don't know, activity that kids could do, you'd be like, okay, well, what is it? And how much does it cost? And am I signing a waiver of your life away, right? You go horse riding, you sign this big long waiver. You would understand the risks of what they were engaging in. Whereas in the online world, we don't, we kind of just say, oh, that's your thing, go play.
Yeah.
Just, and we hope for the best. And I bring it back sometimes to books. We wouldn't say, oh, booking, oh, I don't know much about that. Can you just do 20 minutes of booking over there? Be really quiet and, don't do it in your bedroom because I heard that's bad. We'd say, like, what are you reading? A kid reading the Anarchist Cookbook is probably not okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so if we can reframe it into just putting aside that we judge screens and especially video games a lot, and we need to actually rewire that a bit and kind of come and meet them at their level, and be curious. And even if you have to fake that, then that is a strategy to support them be a little bit more, just feel more empowered and autonomous in those spaces, like what they're into matters.
Yes, exactly. I remember that from our first chat, and that really stuck with me about being interested in their world rather than judgy and trying to belittle or dismiss their world, if that's what they're into.
And we probably had an experience of that ourselves. I will never forget, my mum used to hate Under the Bridge by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Whenever that song came on, she would say, oh, this moany guy, why, blah, blah, blah. And she was really like supportive of a lot of stuff that I wanted to do. She would take me to Alternative Nation or Home Bake or whatever. Sometimes she'd even come along. But, like there were parts where she would just say, I don't like this thing you're doing. And that sticks with me. So if the thing that you're doing is like 6 hours on the weekend, that's a lot of time that you're disconnecting from your kid rather than being like, so what did you build today in Minecraft? How's that going? Yeah. Tell me what the best thing that happened on the internet today was. The same way we would, I say, what was the best thing that you thought you did in your soccer match or, whatever activity you're in.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to big tech social media now, not gaming. Because one of the things that my son absolutely loves is Asian cooking YouTube. And so I have found myself saying, what was your favorite recipe that you're excited to try and bring it into real life? So you're not just watching someone else live their best life on the internet and cooking delicious things, but you might actually make this. And he does now. It's amazing. School holidays are now, what are we having for lunch, sweetie? And I have some beautiful Asian something waiting for me. It's incredible. But I had to get involved with that to help him see the pathway between just being passive and watching and actually bringing that interest into the real life context. And what I found really fascinating, and this has probably got to do with dopamine pathways, was how mean to himself he was about stuffing up in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, dude, these guys are cutting these reels to within an inch of recognition of what the original file is, cutting out every little redo, every little slightly burnt steak. No, that's gone. We've got to do it again. It's not going to be good for the video. And like, you're not seeing any of that happen. So you think that people can just magically cook amazingly and you're the problem and you suck for not being able to cook. It takes work.
Yeah. Yeah. So the media literacy behind that, right, is to be able to say what goes into being an influencer or a content creator at that level.
I'd imagine with, there'd be dancing, there'd be like music TikToks, there'd be, you think, oh my God, I can't do the routine. But those girls that put that together spent like their entire summer holidays.
That's right.
For that 1 90-second clip.
Yeah. And like Beyonce spent 9 months rehearsing for her, like, however long 3-minute Super Bowl performance or whatever, So we don't see what goes on. We consume the product.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't actually want to consume the whole thing where we watch all day long how it took them, 50,000 takes and all of those tiny, tiny things are like, oh, this is boring.
Yeah.
So,
well, like we say about like, sorry, MasterChef, but honestly, if you sit through a whole episode of MasterChef, you're like, we could have done this in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
like, why do we need to rehash this from different angle
yeah,
and more scary music about the stuff up and like
look, you're talking to a person,
Yeah.
my form of ADHD is cooking is a waste of time. I'm the like throw 4 things in a pot, put it on the boil, maybe chuck some sauce on, and that's my cooking. So yes, absolutely. There's so many ways, and this is media literacy to understand that what we consume is a product that has been finely tuned, and you can have an amazing career being an editor, all of those sorts of things to produce those products, but we cannot compare ourselves to, again, probably chefs. It's like, mate, did I miss the part where you did a 3-year apprenticeship and had a 20-year career? And then, right? Like,
and then hired a video editor to sit there all day making you look as good as you possibly could.
Possible, right? So really zooming out and go, okay, what was behind that? And we used to do that really well with some of the kind of beauty campaigns, or we'd zoom out and go, okay, well, what went into this Vogue shoot? We'll look at all of the different little bits and pieces, look at the tweaking and the photoshopping and all of that sort of stuff.
So would you say it's a parent's job to help pull the lens back and take them through all the different parts? Like if you've got a kid who's watching dance videos and feeling like they're a shit dancer, or the cooking, or, whatever the skill-based kind of, or trick, something you do perfect. And like they probably did that 4,000 times before the tennis ball landed right in the tube after bouncing off the wall like 6 times.
And there probably is like the bloopers reel of what it took to get there. So is it a parent's job? I think it's a parent's job to ask the questions, to create critical thinking. It's not a parent's job to necessarily say, did you know all of these things, and like be the, knowledge holder, but to actually be able to ask the questions that then spark critical thinking or ways of thinking that help them question. And there's 2 sides to this, because if they learn to question that, they'll learn to question you. And it's not about not questioning us. It's usually the tone in which they do that. And so, like we've got to be careful, because it's like, yes, question all of that, but still do what I say. So, and like my 7-year-old is really good at going, yeah, but mum, you do blah, blah, blah. So, and that can, in a generation ago, gosh, if I did that to my dad, there would be hell to pay. There wouldn't, So parenting has changed a lot. We have to be curious, not furious, I think is something Justin Coulson says quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And it's almost like parenting mimics the web 2.0. Like when the conversation started to go 2 ways, I almost feel like the parent-child conversation has started to go two ways a lot more as well.
Yes.
And, you know, there's a lot of good in that. I genuinely believe that we should not just take what our parents say for face value, but it's also the job of parents to know what we know we're better at seeing and knowing from lived experience.
Absolutely, right? We have to put those safety boundaries in place. And the conversation is always open if it's respectful, right? So I'm constantly saying, I can tell that you want to question me on something, but I'm wondering if that way of speaking to me is going to get you there. And she's like, okay.
Damn it, I've got a psych mum.
Right?
This sucks.
Yeah, it does. It totally does. But it's not, and it's all about, can I communicate my needs clearly? And that helps her set boundaries as well, right? It's all about modeling. And you know, I've got the 3 M's of digital nutrition, which has just become 4 with modeling, because the role of modeling is so important, because we're social creatures. That's why we watch MasterChef. That's why kids watch each other gaming, is because they're social learning. They actually want to be the best they possibly can in that game. So they go and watch the best play. So that who we're modeling and what we're modeling is of utmost importance right now, because there's so much information to consume. We need to be able to identify the information that aligns to our values, and to be able to some degree identify if it's absolute codswallop, right? And the whole fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, huge conversation, especially as we head into, you know, the US election. And I think there's 60 different nation states that are going to federal elections this year. And we could actually be one of them. We don't know, we hope not, but, you know, thinking about that, we really do. I mean, this is really shaping democracy at this point in ways that, well, we've had a few election cycles, but this is going to be quite a big one.
Yeah. And I want to talk about AI, but I just want to stay on social for a little bit longer, because the other thing I wanted to bring up, especially with YouTube, and it's something obviously I understood more deeply when I read Johann Hari's book, Stolen Focus, when he explained the escalation of sensationalism in the algorithm of YouTube. And probably about 3 years ago, I couldn't figure out why my son, with the way he grew up in our household, was so obsessed with Nick Kyrgios as a tennis player. Now, look, there are some things I actually love about Nick. I think he's great for the sport in a few respects, but I genuinely believe that one should also model sportsmanship if one is an elite athlete. It is your job to be a good example for kids. And if you have psychological work that you need to do to be better at that aspect of being an elite sports person who earns millions of dollars, you should be doing that work.
That's
Sorry.
right. Yeah.
So I bring it up because I was like, but he knows all of that stuff is wrong, and the throwing of the rackets and the and I was seeing him, my son, have issues on the tennis court when things got tight and tough, and he started to tantrum, and I was like, whoa, what is this? So once I then read that tech chapter on how the YouTube algorithm was explained, I then researched it independently to make sure that, you know, it held up, because that's just me being a nerd. And then I thought, let's just try starting with Roger Federer's top 24 hands on YouTube, and then see on the side what's suggested. So we get Roger's top 24 hands to start with. Then in the suggestions, we get biggest rallies of all time. So I click that one. We watch that. They were huge. It was fantastic. Then I see a suggestion, Roger fights the umpire. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. I've never seen Roger have a hissy fit on court, certainly not in his later part of the career. So we watch that. And then I see Nick Kyrgios turns up. So I tested it out in a sport that I know really well. So I know to look for what escalation might look like in that context. Every single time we ended up with Nick having a hissy fit on the court, every single time, by 4th or 5th suggestions. And I was like, whoa, this brings me to talk about someone that a lot of parents have an issue with, and I know even really serious issues, someone like Andrew Tate, for example. We're all working really hard to raise respectful dudes, those of us who are parents of boys, and being healthy in their masculine as well as healthy in their respect for women and girls. And a guy like this comes along, and I feel like some of it is in part because we're not recognizing that in the rising of one group, women, for example, feeling able to do all the things and have access to all the things, there's an inadvertent dark force that then plays to the sensitivities of the other group that might feel like that's a threat. And then, we see it all the time. We see it in politics. Someone who hasn't studied politics might not see it, but I did a European political science degree, so I see it plenty.
Yeah.
And I think we need to navigate what that pathway is and how we can get a bit more involved in what they're actually watching in these short form YouTube clips. Because now that hopefully parents who might not have read Johann's book on this or explored this might start to become a bit more aware of what those suggested viewing areas are and how quickly your kid can end up on something that is really toxic.
There are so many pieces of what you just said.
I know. I talked for a while there.
No,
but I just wanted to, again, paint a personal picture of like having this lived experience.
Absolutely.
Because often we just talk info and then people don't know what the transformation or the the investigation piece might look like in their own lives.
Yeah, yeah. And I love it because you were there to go, okay, let's look at this and actually call it out as you search and go, here's more sensation. Here's more sensation. Are you sure? Would you like some more sensation with your sensation? And what that does and how you feel. So you're there as the guide, right? To say, oh, let's look at this with that critical lens. It's actually not about avoiding it. Oh, we can't have any sensation. Don't go there. It's about going, oh, look at that. Watch that. Does that align to the stuff that matters? Does that align to who we are as a family? Is that the kind of tennis player you want to be? Because partly like you want to see it so that you can push against it. Some of the kind of best skills I have are a reaction to people in my life that I do not want to emulate. And then to bring in that actual role model of saying, well, here's a better way of doing it. Sure, you could have a hissy fit and you can look like a silly Willy, to the whole world, but then there's this person and this person holds our values a lot more. That is a conversation that I don't think enough parents have time for, or even have their own awareness to, and their own kind of, as you say, they're not doing the work. And that for us is mostly quite expensive sometimes. Like it's not everyone can run off to a psychologist that is available and affordable in order to do that. Sometimes, lots and lots of work. I do that work. I do it and I sit there and I go off to my psychologist and do that work as well. So then there's the kind of take question. And I think underneath that is a lot of I don't want to say little lost boys because that's kind of infantilizing almost, but to say that there's not enough strong meaning and belonging and shepherding of that healthy masculinity in society. Something that's kind of coming up for me at the moment quite regularly, and I went for a walk this morning, and my local park is in a bit of disrepair. We don't want kids to be on their screens, but then we give them nowhere to be embodied, especially teenagers. They can't go to the mall and hang out because then they're mall rats. They can't, hang out in certain places because that's loitering. We actually have quite a disdain in society for teenagers and teenage boys.
I'm so glad you said that because it's so true. We need to give them cool places to be and hang.
Yeah. And we don't. And I've had conversations with the Premier of New South Wales about the need to provide basketball courts, facilitated spaces. You cannot just kind of give kids basketball courts. You need to then go and have people who are facilitating things so that the basketball hoops don't just get broken, because that's invariably what kids are going to do when they're using things. Things break and it's not their fault. But we don't really like teenagers, right? Especially, as I say, teenage boys. They're addicts if they're on their screens and they're, doing the wrong thing, but then like literally school holidays, where do teenage boys go?
Mm.
They hopefully go to each other's houses, they jump on their bikes, they go around, they do whatever but I don't see enough of that, especially in inner cities and big cities that might, rural areas have the whole other different set of challenges as well. But ultimately, we're really in a pickle with our attitude to young people.
Yeah, we are. I always say just invite anyone, anytime.
Yeah. And the
I
risk, the
Yeah.
physical risk stuff is really interesting too. Like I've worked with a school in New Zealand that when they were looking at reducing and banning phones, they did it in such a brilliant way. They built a BMX bike track and they built a rock climbing wall. Now they had a huge kerfuffle over all of the risk and danger that kids were going to be placed in, and they had to literally show the psychological and kind of long-term impact on minds versus the risk of somebody, breaking an arm.
Mm.
And it's just, to me, so fascinating how that becomes, yeah, out of whack in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? We've safety proofed play areas, even for our little kids, to within an inch. Like, you don't even have monkey bars
No,
anymore half the time
no.
because someone might break a bone, and
Yeah.
then, but like someone might break their mental health
Yeah.
sitting on a screen because they're safe
Yeah.
at home, and
Yeah.
that is a real big shift that we need to make societally. How do we do that? That's
Oh, look, I've got
wow, that's huge, really.
and look, how do we do that in and again, I live in New South Wales. I'll talk about New South Wales in a state that is, as of the 13th of May, I think it is, you can literally build 6 to 8 stories across 31 different train stations. And, suddenly we have this higher density living, but no planning for schools, health, or green spaces, community spaces, youth facilities, anything like that. So it's such a fascinating kind of conversation. What I think personally we can do is we can get and there's different programs, that things that come to mind are Duke of Ed. So some schools run Duke of Ed programs. There's also, and this comes with a bit of a caveat, is Australian Army Cadets. I was an Army cadet. I went off to the 203 Regional Cadet Unit in Dundas on Friday afternoons for a big chunk of time. It was basically girl guys with boys, which is what I was
That would have
attracted
been
to it.
perfect at 16.
But
Yeah.
you got to do all sorts of things. You went on camp and orienteering, and lived in hoochies and did all of these kind of fun, embodied, practical, novel stuff with very clear parameters around who you saluted to when, certain people walked into the room. There was this beautiful mix of adventure and discipline. And yeah, it probably sounds really strange coming from me, like go and do Army Cadets, but actually maybe consider going and doing Army Cadets. Lots of the young women that I work with actually are a part of their cadet units.
So
Really cool.
good. And I'm so glad our school does Duke of Ed, because we were right on that train when that was offered, and they just came back from their bronze journey and had to navigate their way up the Northern Walk. And I just think that is like, he had some low moments, but he came back and he said, oh my gosh, like that was so hard. But at the same time, I'm so glad I did that. It was so good.
And the resilience in that, right? I think as a society, we are so scared of feeling bad. We don't want to have any negative affect emotion. It's like, no, don't feel bad ever. Happiness is the aim. And actually, that has sold us up the wrong path, because we have to be present and able to tolerate some levels of appropriate distress. We have to be able to have crappy moments. My kid was like really kicking off this morning because we don't have TV before school, and school started back, and she was begging me. And I had to be okay. Like, I was really dysregulated, to be honest. I had to take a much longer walk than usual because I had to get myself back online, because her distress, I had to go high while she went through that to help her co-regulate, to hold a really firm boundary and say, we just don't do this. This is, you will thank me and it will be okay. But I got to go through the little wah-wahs with you right now. And then you're fine.
Yeah.
Right. And he came back from Duke of Ed. He had some low moments. It was probably cold and wet and whatever. And then at the end, when we zoom out and look at the big context, it was brilliant and it was so worth it.
So worth
So,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. So Instagram is the next thing I want to talk about, and probably a little peppering of Snapchat, one that I'm not so au fait with because we actually have a boundary around Snapchat. I just saw some really unhealthy things happening with friends' kids who were on it. And I thought, yeah, if you're not like pestering me every single day to be there and it's not causing you social distress to not be there and be included because your three best mates are on there, then no, we're not going to do that one.
Yeah.
I'm not going to look at it. We're just not going to have it.
Yep.
And I know though, so many parents are dealing with questions around inclusivity and all my friends have it and therefore why can't I? This came up in the club when I asked our members last night, oh, I'm talking to Jocelyn tomorrow. What's everyone got on their mind? And that was a huge thing that came up time and again. So how do we find healthy in the landscape of social connection on socials into the night? Like, let's just say your three besties are allowed, or they've found a way to be, let's be honest, because that's often part of it, to be on Snapchat or Insta in a WhatsApp group even.
Yeah.
Chatting into the night late, but you're not even allowed your phone in your bedroom. How are we navigating that one, Jocelyn?
So again, like insert whichever cool app and social media platform, because again, you know, that could change tomorrow. And you haven't even said the T word for TikTok.
I know. Sorry. Yes.
So there are many
My
ways.
Gen X is showing. Yeah.
there are many ways that we keep connected, and there are many excuses for why you need all of the things to be available all of the hours of all of the days in order to be a good friend. And so some of the conversations that I have with, again, both young people in schools as well as parents and families is around what does being a good friend mean, and how can you actually be a good friend if you haven't had enough sleep, right? So I always bring it back to sleep, and because sleep is just the easiest well-being hack, and it addresses a lot of the concerns that many young people are showing up with because they're just chronically underslept and they're consuming too much information. So there's a thing, I work with pacts instead of contracts. So compacts, and you know, we would generally say pacts over contracts, which is how do we make agreements around what works for our family, but also for kids, and this is a really like up-leveled one, how do kids say, oh, you know how parents are nagging us about going to bed and using our phones too much? Maybe they've got a point. How do we put some agreements in how we use, let's just call it direct messaging, right? The DMs and the group chat. What we do there is we say, okay, can we make an agreement that if I don't respond between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m., I don't get kicked out of the group, right? You can't make me feel bad because my parents have particular rules that are different to your parents' rules, right?
Ooh, I love that. And how young can we be having that conversation? I feel like tweens could even be involved in this.
You can, like, my kid has these conversations. I literally had this conversation with her friend across the road where we talked about, she doesn't have a phone. She certainly doesn't have a phone that accesses TikTok. When she comes to play at your house, I would like phones not to be out, that you guys are just playing. Can we do that? Yes, no problem. In fact, to the point that the mum then texted me and said, oh, they're going to look at some crafting videos to play craft. Is it okay if Nora looks at the phone? And I was like, yes, parents app, trust app activated. Because Nora had said to the mum, I'm not allowed to look at things on a phone without an adult present. Can you check with mum? Yeah. So I'm having those conversations. Are these conversations cool, right? Does it make you feel like the most popular girl in the school? Probably not. But again, part of what I talk to my kid about is this is going to be good for your brain because your brain is still growing and learning how to be in the world. And she understands that. And the more we can talk about the end game and why we're doing it, not just how we're doing it, and like our fear in that moment or the no in the moment, then that helps empower them to understand we're not just being power trippers, right? There's actually more to it. So we can start from tweens, and then here's the other up level for us as parents, to call the parents and say, hey, can I talk to you about this group chat stuff? It's driving me a bit crazy, and I'm sure you don't leave your kid to be online at 2 a.m. Right? But I'm just wondering, I'm really curious about, are you struggling with this too? And name it to tame it. Hey, this feels kind of weird and vulnerable. Can I have an awkward conversation with you about tech? Right? And I think Beck Sparrow talks a little bit about this as well. There's lots of people who talk about, like, how do we have just more open conversations? And to go back to the 90s, like, my mum would ring Amy West's mum and say, hey, are they really going to the Hill Centre dance party? Or who's picking them up, and who's, like, get the lowdown. There was no like, oh, I don't want to cross boundaries. I don't want to seem like that.
Yeah.
It was just
like there's that a bit, and this is the issue with the parent 2.0, where it is the two-way conversation, where it is more friend heavy, in today's day and age. And a lot of us can feel that, like, if we think about our own dynamic with our parents versus the dynamic we've crafted with our own kids.
Yeah.
And so you can forget, you've got to jump in there as the parent. And in senior school, often we don't meet naturally the parents, like our kids are getting themselves off to school in the bus or whatever, and you're more ships in the night, if anything, and you see each other at like the one fundraiser and cross each other at parent-teacher interview or a quick drop-off. So like reaching out and having that conversation and framing it as, can I just be a bit awkward and vulnerable for a second, talk about tech? Maybe you make a new bestie in your adult years, because you find out they're feeling really weird about the whole thing too. And I think we forget that we have opportunities to connect with other parents.
Yeah. And I see it because it's all in the mums Facebook groups that I'm in. They're like, hey, what do you do about your teen doing this? And I'm like, this is so interesting, because we're using technology to facilitate our own learning and our own connection, but and often they're anonymous due to protecting child's identity. No, it's anonymous due to, I don't want to look like the person who's too scared to call my kid's friend's mum. Right? And say, hey, can we have a chat? I'd really love to connect. I really feel alone as a parent. I feel like, all that stuff that we're feeling, to be able to name it again, and to go to Brené's kind of vulnerability stuff, there's so much freedom when we connect. The other thing I see in a lot of those parenting forums is, I'm really lonely. How do I meet people? Right?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Like literally, and I within my own friendship group, I've created like a lady folk lunch where I wrote a list of 48 people. It ended up being that I don't necessarily have time for one-on-one catch-ups, but every 2 months I book a table for 8 people and invite people to come along and just meet up, and it cross-pollinates my friendship groups in such an interesting way that you can see all of these connections being made, and people just kind of having permission to reconnect with who they are as well, which is super fun. Slightly off what we were talking about, but again, it kind of comes back to asking for what you need and reaching out. And
I don't think we went off topic. I think what you're talking about is the opportunity to actually connect, and in building your own strong relationships, you're able to then navigate the complexity of parenthood together in the context of this whole tech thing, because like most of us didn't grow up with this level of tech and interaction or influence from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of that is actually problem solving that your kid can then go and see. They see you say, oh, I'm going out to lunch with my friends this afternoon. Mum needs time to go and chill out, and no, you're not coming. And that is a really good identity piece for saying, well, we're independent beings, and I, have my own identity, and I support myself and I look after myself. That's a form of self-care for me, is to have time with my mates. So there's a lot of, again, that role modeling, they're watching us on our phone. They're watching what time we go to bed, or what they're like dealing with our perimenopausal rage that pops out of nowhere.
I know. What is the design of getting tweens and teens to line up with the mum's perimenopause journey? That is just quite a, I, like my son and I say, oh, our brains are both going a bit nuts at the same time. Like, so we're in it together in a weird way.
Absolutely. And again, having had a baby quite late, not that far out of my 40th. So, again, a generation ago, been really different. So look, it's all of this, I find we focus so much on the technology, and it's actually the technology under our skull and the humanity, like in our this sack of skin that we walk around in, that if we connect with that, then a lot of these, I'm not saying big tech will go away. I'm not saying there won't be other issues, but I think we kind of some aspects of what's happening in the kind of conversations here is about blaming big tech. And while I am not saying, oh no, they're fine, they were just trying to like make a social media platform where we could like meet people.
Connect. Yeah.
I'm saying I personally cannot fight that machine in this lifetime. There are awesome people doing that work, and I support and praise that. But for me, what I can empower people to do is to use their own free will and the information that they can get, like you're describing. I went and fact check Johann's kind of ideas there. And yes, that's how it's working. And, you know, you don't even want to know about how sticky the TikTok algorithm is, which don't know if you knew this, but it's a very different algorithm in China where it promotes pro-educational information. So it's only in the West that it's got this like sensationalized algorithm that promotes all that junk. So
wow.
probably tells you everything you need to know about TikTok, right? If you were using the Chinese version, you are getting all of the like how to study harder, how to become, you know,
Yeah.
insert socially
A
condemned.
perfect doctor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
Wow.
yeah, that you know, the more that we can, and it's why my tagline had been, you know, stay human in a digital world, is what it makes us human that is different to the technology that we're using. Because I mean,
Yes.
ultimately it was humans, mostly men, who designed it. And you know, that leads into whole big conversations about diversity in tech design and who's writing the algorithm and creating the algorithms, and why we need such diversity and inclusion in those spaces, so that we're designing ethically, which is a whole nother conversation, but
It
it's happening
is.
slowly.
And so I'm hearing this humanness. Don't forget the humanness. Don't forget the parent-child dynamic. Don't forget you've got floodlights, they've got a flashlight. And I love that coming through, because I really feel like that's going to land for people. And so when a club member shared something she just found out, which was chat groups happening after 10:30, when the only reason they had a pact, and the pact was Spotify and music helps me go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately the teen brain just gets lured in because it's just way too luring.
Yeah.
And they end up chatting with their friends late at night. We should not be having that conversation with our kid. This is what I'm hearing from you. Correct me if I'm wrong. In the context of tech is bad, I'm banning it altogether.
Yeah.
We should be having the conversation about what makes us healthy, what makes friendships healthy. Do you need me to step in and have a chat to the parents if you feel like you're going to be excluded for not having these late night chats? Because I can do that, even though you'll probably be
You
mortified,
hate me.
but
Yeah.
it'll help. And would you like me to get you an old school music player if you find it just too hard to avoid your iPad? So that you can still have that on, like good music on, and then we remove that temptation.
Absolutely. So it's about compassion. Hey, you know what? I thought your brain could overcome that temptation, but that temptation is too great. It's like the marshmallow experiment, but digitally.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to sit this right here, and you know, it's the broccoli and the chocolate is all in the one iPad, right? You can, yes, go and do your homework, but you could also talk to your friends for the next 14 hours. And we're expecting an underdeveloped brain to have that control. And we just go, guess what? You tried really hard, I'm sure, but you couldn't contain that. So I'm going to use technology. I'm going to set, you know, the parental controls so that only Spotify is accessible. And when you try and override that, I will find out. And then we'll have a different conversation. Yeah.
And so if the parent, because I remember now she also said, I don't know how, because we had controls in place for it to only be Spotify. So it could be like a private browser, or it could be something they've found a way. Probably a helpful mate has taught them how.
And again, you Google it, they all Google and then put videos about how to do it. So it can be as simple as changing the time from 6:30 in the morning to PM. So when they flip it around, then the controls are switching off at 9 a.m., not 9 p.m. So if
Mm.
you've befuddled the time, then yeah, the control's 9 p.m., but the phone thinks it's actually 9 a.m. So it's not putting the controls on. The
Yeah.
other thing to say
Okay.
about DMs and what's happening when young people feel that they need to be up and available for each other is they're supporting themselves through mental health issues.
Hmm.
And this is of massive concern to me because obviously your 15-year-old, unless they've hacked the space-time continuum, probably have not done the 5+1 pathway to becoming a psychologist. They have not
Hmm.
spent those 6 years. And so their ability to actually effectively support their friend in crisis, that might be, I think I want to cut myself. That might be, my boyfriend's asking me for nudes. What should I do? That could be a range of different levels of distress. They simply don't have the skills to really help, but they think
Mm.
to be a really good friend, they should have the answers.
Yeah.
So even within that context, I help young people be able to find the language to say, that sounds like it's really tough, and I'm not sure what you should really do because I'm just like you. Why don't we call Kids Helpline? And we can even not have to talk to someone on Kids Helpline, but you can use Kids Helpline circles where it's the text chat. So you can
Mm.
actually
Mm.
text, which is what kids prefer over live calling. We could, who is your trusted adult? Who's the person that you feel like, even though it's a bit scary, we could go and talk to? Can I come with you to talk to that person? So even teaching
Nice.
them those skills so that they can say, I'm a good friend, even if I can't solve the problem, because I am only a 15-year-old girl just like you,
Mm.
right? I don't,
So good.
right?
So
And
good.
and and they just they go, oh, that feels so much better. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I am a good friend. I am a good friend. I thought I needed to solve their problems. And
Mm.
again, that can apply for us when we have mates who are in got big stuff going down and we're like, quick, quick, fix solve, fix solve. How can I be? Sometimes it's just to say, oh, that is heavy,
Yeah.
right? And asking sometimes, do you need me to actually fix this, or do you just need someone to hear you out?
Hmm.
Um, so
That's
yeah,
something
like,
I learnt very late.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
again, we're fixers, right? We're here
Mm.
and we're connective and we have solutions and ways of doing things, especially for other people. Never quite solve my own problems in the way I can for my clients, for instance, but that's okay. I go to my own support crew for that. And again,
Mm.
for many parents, they're supporting so many people, and they often come to me on the verge of burnout for counseling. And I'm like, okay, first thing we do is we get your sleep sorted. Second thing we do is we build your cheerleading crew up again. And asking for help is so tough for women, I find. But when you've got that support crew, that's a big shift for a lot of parents. So, and again, role modeling. If we think we have to solve it all, kids will think they have to solve it all too.
Absolutely. And in your support crew and reaching out, yes, it's vulnerable. Yes, it can feel icky, but it's when we realize no one's perfect.
Yeah, and it's also the great honor when somebody does, right?
Mm.
Like we think, oh my God, I'm gonna contact you and I'm gonna say, oh, things are really awful. And then I'm gonna say, oh, too bad, so sad. I don't have time for that. I'm really busy. Like time opens up when you've got a mate who comes to you and says, this is going on. Can I, bend your ear?
Mm.
And put yourself in the perspective of when somebody comes to you and something's happened, what are you likely to do? Most of us are likely to, absolutely down tools and within reason, support that person. So when we kind of can just imagine that and remember the honor that it is when somebody comes to you, give yourself some permission. I think we're
Yeah.
so tough on ourselves as women and mums in at this kind of point in human history because we've got so many kind of expectations and pressure on ultimately an ancient operating system. Our minds are, really Paleolithic, but we still only have 24 hours in the day, yet we're expecting ourselves to be like literally computers.
Mm-hmm. And
Wild.
yeah, and then I would say the same of dads in a sense,
Mm,
who have often been left out of the minutiae of a
mm,
parent-kid relationship
mm,
traditionally.
mm,
But now that we are all desperately trying to even things up as a collective and share the mother load and all that
mm.
stuff, and there are a lot of guys who are really up for it.
Mm.
Or even in same-sex partnerships, you often have
Mm.
those dominant roles that
Personalities,
still
yeah.
exist, and we're still trying to share the load
Yeah.
with the person who naturally takes more things on. But we're all still finding this tech thing really quite confronting. And I think to think about it as not tech, let's put that aside and let's think about it in the sense that we're trying to raise good humans who understand critical thinking, who understand what red flags look like, who understand what it feels like to be a good friend. That's stuff that we can all talk about and know how to do better.
Mm.
And tech is just the subject that we're talking about it in.
That's right. Absolutely. Because whether it's respectful relationships, they might have some level of tech facilitation around that relationship, but it's still the underlying values and principles of like, how are you going to navigate your way through a problem that pops up in whatever context?
Mm.
Yeah.
And for the neurospicy kids
Mm-hmm.
and their parents, there's often that dance between allowing for the like the brain regulation
Yeah.
that often happens with some screen time.
Yes.
It's just like, oh, everything just calms
Yes.
down. I just get to
Yes.
be
Yes.
calm right now and soothed.
Yes.
And then, like, some weird flip switch seems to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard
Mm.
so many
Mm.
parents talk about it where
Yes.
it goes the
The
other
other way.
way.
Yeah.
Um,
And what's going on here is just nervous system regulation. So again,
mm,
depending on, you know, your neurotype and how your neurodivergence and neurodiversity, in the case of AU ADHD, shows up, is actually very, very specific to you. And this is where a digital diet analogy applies even more, because there's kind of like limits within the different there's so many aspects. So like in terms of the neurotype, so it can be like too much cadence and too much sensitivity, and then you literally have cognitive overload. It
mm,
can be that you need to kind of have a bit of focus, but for a certain amount of time. So you need to know that kind of sweet spot. So it's getting the content and the length of time, then the activities that you do when you come off screen. So again, that embodiment and feeling back in your body. So you've used your mind, but then you kind of can feel your muscles and bring that somatic kind of awareness back in. Some polyvagal kind of theory stuff can be useful there as well. I'm going to write this year a course about screens and neurodivergence. I've put it off for so
ooh,
long
excellent.
because it's like, how many different versions of that do we need for the different ways that our neurotypes show up? And without going into super stereotypes around autism, even within that, there's so many different ways that we can use technology, but that digital diet uniqueness is really key, because we don't want to rev up too much. We don't want to then kind of numb out too much either. And depending on what you need at different times, then that's going to look different, as well as you then change and grow and your brain develops, and then you need different
Mm.
things. And
I
very
love that,
complex.
because the food analogy then comes back. Like, some people have histamine pathways that get activated with certain food groups. And so you want to
Exactly.
lower those
Yep.
in that ADHD kid or that autistic kid. But then other people thrive on like tons of steak or whatever it is.
That's right.
And that
Yeah.
feels really grounding for them.
Yeah.
So we really want to. And so the same is with tech, to think about different forms of tech, different types of games, different types of YouTube channels that they subscribe
Mm-hmm.
to, and notice responses, times of length, and almost kind of just raise your awareness on what's helping and what's harming,
Yeah. So
maybe.
it's like when you do an elimination diet and you go, okay, I've been eating
Mm,
everything, and then I take this one thing out and I go, oh, it was the gluten, or oh, it was the dairy, or oh, it was whatever, right? It was actually playing alone can be one of them, that I actually go really, really into myself and I need to play with other people. So again, there's no one size fits all. And when we try, you know, when people often say, oh, you weren't specific enough. And I'm like, that's because I cannot literally know you, your family, and your style of consuming technology in a, you know, group presentation where I've got 400 people in a call.
yeah.
So, you know, I will write the book as well. That's the other thing on the list for 2024. And again, you know, knowing my neurotype and having had an ADHD diagnosis for 13 years, I know that I love doing a million things at once, and that is highly unhelpful for completing the really important things that I say I want to do, but my brain struggles to complete. So yeah.
Well, we're looking forward to it whenever that hyper focus kicks in and you can get that shit done. Brilliant. I have one more question, and I don't want it to feel like I'm opening up a huge can of worms. It doesn't need to even be big, but I mean, to even say the dawning of AI, it's ridiculous. We are in the quagmire of AI. We're already there. Are there things we need to be mindful of as it becomes more and more prevalent in study tool options, essay writing options, tech, and how it might be being used with bots in gaming? Like, I don't even know. So what do you know are the most important things for us to be mindful of in the AI landscape?
Okay. Probably the most salient thing is that AI is just generating a bucket ton of junk information that is pervading what we consume. Okay. So
Right.
suddenly,
So no biggie.
It's no biggie, but to go from the analogy of like the food in your local grocery store is no GMO to everything is now possibly GMO, and there's no label for GMO yet, right? And part of the digital nutrition concept is like, imagine we had labels, nutritional labels and ingredient labels. So when your kid comes to you and says, can I have this thing? We can go, oh, mate, look how much palm oil is in that. We don't
Wouldn't that
do
be
stuff.
great for
Wouldn't
tech?
it? Wouldn't it be
Yeah.
great, right? And there are moves towards this, but the quantification is really complex. So what we're seeing is just this flooding of crap content, bot written stuff. I proudly put out 30 pages of some content recently, and I put a disclaimer that I did not use generative AI or a large language model to generate any of the content. Now, that either makes me incredibly silly for not, or really, really smart that I didn't need to. I don't know yet which one of those it is, but ultimately we are being exposed to a lot of junk. We need to be able to identify it, and we need to, again, go back to culling those sources, following trusted sources of things like news, especially if you're getting your news from social media. You need to do things like within Instagram, go back and choose to be shown political content, because that actually is how you're going to get independent sources of news like Missing Perspectives or Cheap Media or any of those kinds of things. And then we need to kind of, again, have a whole conversation about how we want to be good thinking humans. Like, concentration is the most kind of valuable tool, I think, that we need to hone, because we need to be able to concentrate to solve some of these really big problems that the world is facing.
Yeah.
And when we can learn to do that, that's where we, get some joy. But we need to be able to focus and pick out what is real and what is fake, and then trust those sources. Look, AI is showing up in so many different ways. I'm using it to write my case notes. I'm using, some things that really save me time and then save me from putting my psych fees up this year. I really don't want to have a price increase.
100%. I haven't had to increase our sponsorship rates because we are now able to AI a transcript, which benefits our listeners, our deaf community who haven't been able to access, like on and on. You could go about the benefits. And I think the digital nutrition framework, the concept, is actually a really beautiful one to bring across to what's helpful, what's harmful, what's a nasty additive versus actually it's bicarb soda if you look up that number. So no biggie. And to think about that with AI as well.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode on AI, because the uses of it are in so many different ways, obviously based on whether it's large language models that we're trying to deploy in different ways, or even using large action models, which is a whole new interesting thing. If you have a look at the Rabbit R1 little device, which I have on order and I'm going to play with when it gets here later in the week.
Awesome. Yeah, I do worry about, like, the biggest thing we had to worry about as teen girls in the 80s and 90s was, photoshopped thigh gaps
Mm.
and that not being disclosed. And I feel like now we just have like completely synthetic beauty of human, like non-existent humans who've been manufactured through tech to compete with. And that scares a lot of parents.
Absolutely, because I think too that the way that our senses of beauty is shaped is through what we see. And when there's, like again, the algorithm can serve you one particular form of beauty and ignore the diversity of bodies and skin color and limb differences or facial differences and all of those things. It's the opposite of actually what we were expecting when we, again, wear those body shop t-shirts in the 90s that said, there's 8 million supermodels in the world and 6 billion people or whatever. And now there's like 8 billion people in the world and millions of influencers and millions of kind of celebrities and supermodels that we're looking towards. There's not just the 8 that we used to, think, oh my gosh. And the diversity that is missing when we narrow down, and that's what the algorithm really does, is narrow us down into a very, very specific corner rather than kind of keep giving us all of that, beautiful richness that's out there.
Yeah.
The silo effect can work well, but it can also work negatively as well. So.
And again, it's then about having conversations and saying, oh, that's interesting that came up, or that you now believe that. Let's have a look at what other people believe, and just so that we can keep things, or yes.
Like
gosh.
what do you like about that? What is beautiful about that to you? And understanding that is a robot and that there can be robot beauty, right?
Yeah.
You go to the Easter show and you see the dog show and like, there's somebody who's trained to look at like how perfect a dog can be. I don't see any of that. I see different types of dogs like, oh, that's a nice dog. But we have to be trained in particular types of visual literacy. Like it's a whole other thing where when you look at something enough and you know what you're looking for, you can actually get really good at it. So, there's different senses of, well, that's beautiful for a robot. Versus that's beautiful for a 40-something-year-old woman who hasn't dyed her hair in 5 years. And
I love it. Yeah, I think totally. I see what you're saying there. So again, digital nutrition when it comes to AI is what's helpful, what looks like it could actually make us get more of the things we love done, and be of more service to people, versus what is harmful, distorting our sense of reality and making us not like reality in some parts because it doesn't look right because we're seeing too much of the fake stuff, and just being across those chats.
that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. What
You're
an
welcome.
epic conversation that was. We definitely needed a part 2, didn't we? Wow. Okay. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thanks for your work. And thank you for encouraging us to think about tech in the healthy ways that it can show up in our lives, and the opportunities that it brings us to actually parent, where we think because we didn't have it, oh, well, we don't know about that, and therefore we can't parent on it. You teach us it's actually the opposite. So
yes,
really appreciate it.
The thing I will leave you with is to remember that when your brain is in fear, when your brain is freaking out about all the bad things that you're hearing about teens and tech, you cannot actually make long-term sustainable choices to fix, solve, and improve, because you're just in. So my approach is specific in that I want to empower you to take an action that will stick, not freak out and do nothing.
100%. That's so funny that you're leaving us with that, because I literally wrote as a reflection this morning, distilling something I've been thinking about for a while, is fear can be a great jolt, like, oh, I need to do something about this because there is an issue here. But fear is not the part of the lasting change piece. That part can only happen if we are relaxed, empowered, and productive about the excitement towards a better goal around that thing.
You've got to be motivated, right? And you have to generally see a positive, hopeful future.
Yeah.
And a lot of what gets painted is not that. It's, awful, awful stuff. And look, my little PhD idea at the moment is to survey people who read John Haight's new book and to go, okay, in 6 months' time, what are you doing differently after your freak out and you're like, oh my God, you have to read this book? We saw it with The Social Dilemma too. Everyone was like, oh, you've got to watch this documentary. And I would love to know what meaningful, lasting change happened as a result of what was ultimately a very fear-based, lacking in actual solutions. And again, anxious generation, most of the 4 norms, 2 of them very directly fall disproportionately to women to do. So just another job for us. But anyway, we could talk for hours. I will let you go. Thank you for having me. I'm really, grateful to the opportunity to share as widely and as loudly as possible. So yeah.
Oh, you're so welcome. I hope you loved today's show as much as I loved bringing it to you. I want to remind you that if you are someone who craves a low tox community that is judgment-free, full of empowerment, has health professionals and building health professionals that can support you, as well as me in there answering questions multiple times a week, I want to invite you to join the Low Tox Club. For the price of less than a cup of coffee a month, you have an annual membership for $49 Australian, so it's about $30 US or euro, that allows you to have a member masterclass every single month with a health professional or global expert from the podcast, where we have them to ourselves for an hour to ask questions and deep dive further. You have the beautiful supportive chat group. You have Q&As with me answering questions. We read books and talk about them and a whole bunch more. You can head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the Explore tab, and join the club is the very first option on that list. Of course, we have over 10 evergreen courses that you can jump into anytime, whether it's navigating everyday low tox swaps with our Go Low Tox signature course, whether you have kids and you're wanting to know how to best support them with our Low Tox Kids course, whether you're planning a family and looking at a healthy low tox preconception journey, reducing inflammation, especially the chronic kind, with our Inflammation Ninja course, many other courses. You can again head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the courses tab, and you'll see all of the options, which includes a business course, my Low Tox Method program. A lot of people don't know, but I was doing a lot before starting Low Tox Life in 2009, and I was a business consultant across hospitality, health, retail, and cosmetics. I have been in business consulting for a very long time, so I absolutely adore helping people move into the low tox space or develop their low tox businesses. So that's a way I can support you. And then, of course, there's our wonderful social media communities at Low Tox Life on Instagram, and of course, the website with over 250 gluten-free recipes, blogs, downloadable PDFs to help you navigate wanting to get rid of synthetic fragrances in your school or office. I could go on. So head to lowtoxlife.com, see what takes your interest or fancy, and thank you so much for being a part of our podcast community. I love reading your reviews. I appreciate every follow and subscribe, and I want to just remind you to finish off that if there's anything you heard that you found interesting from a medical or scientific perspective, it is intended as education only. Please always chat to a health professional who knows you and your situation best. I'll see you next week. Bye.